I was on Craigslist one evening because I was bored. At this point in my life, I was working full-time. It was tough, stressful, and disheartening, to say the least. I wanted someone to talk to. I have my family, but they lived around half an hour away, and I wasn't very comfortable calling them. Mom and Dad are quite old-fashioned and barely know how to use their own mobiles, let alone talk properly on the phone. They're both in their late 70s now, struggling with their health and old age. So, I looked for someone else. I'm not saying I tried to replace my parents, I know it might sound like that, lol, but the truth is I went on Craigslist to try and find a pen pal. I think that's what they call them, basically, someone from anywhere around the world who you could form a relationship with online just by typing to them each day. Someone that would tell you about their life and just be there for you. It was something I needed, and I saw it as a form of therapy, really. So, sure enough, eventually, after sifting through all the catfish men who were interested in nothing other than getting into bed with me, I found a girl who was 17 named Ellie. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking right now, but please do not. I didn't know she was 17 at the time. On top of this, it was a pen-pal relationship, which is friends only. What I'm about to tell you is something that happened to me and had been happening to Ellie for her entire life. Not only did this send shivers down my soul, but it forced me into action. It forced me to save her from a situation that I couldn't even believe she was telling me. She was a part of this story begins back in 2013. At the time, I had found a few pen pals, but most of them were boring, really slow at responding, or, like I said, catfish men pretending to be girls. In this case, when I found Ellie and she described herself, she was very responsive at messaging back. She was good, interesting, and we actually talked about things that mattered and found, well, a place in my heart. Eventually, Ellie's writing turned dark. I knew there was something wrong with her because she did mention that she had depression and other issues, but I didn't know or expect what she was about to tell me. For the first few weeks of us typing to each other, it was all just mainly small talk. We got to know each other more and more gradually as the days went by, which was kind of cute. She told me about her life, where she lived, and all the upbringing stories. But little did I realize she was only telling me the good things. You see, my life has been very stable. It's been safe, predictable, yes, boring at times, but nothing bad ever happened to me. My parents were both loving, caring, and protective, so were my aunts, uncles, grandfathers, and so on. In this case, Ellie lived a very different life. By the second month, she started to open up a lot more, and her writing became a lot more worrying. She sent me a message that got my red flags going. The message was something along the lines of, "What would you do if your mom locked you in a room and started hitting you for hours on end?" I waited for a moment, briefly pausing, thinking, what the hell is she on about? I sent laughing emojis, thinking that this was some kind of a joke, but she just read it but didn't reply. This made me worry, so I sent question marks back, saying, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" After me digging deeper, she just replied, saying, "Never mind," with a smiling emoji. Our chats went back to normal for a couple of days, but this stuck in my head for the whole time. Why would Ellie ask such a weird question like that? After this, I tried my best at asking more questions about her parents. She was very closed up and rarely answered any of them. But whenever she did, she would always talk about her mom in the weirdest of ways. She would never address her as mom, she would call her mother. Mother does this, mother says that, mother has long hair, mother likes cycling, if you get what I mean. The typical traits of someone who's been abused or at least neglected. The further I dug, the more worrying things became. As Ellie started to open up about things and ask more weird questions surrounding scenarios of what happened if she was beaten, locked away, or even abandoned, I was genuinely thinking I needed to get to the bottom of this, as I thought I was on to something really bad. I got her to download this app. It was an app, I can't remember which one, I think it might have been Facebook, maybe WhatsApp, or one of the older apps from back in 2013 where you could call and voice note people. I thought this was my first step in trying to get a better understanding as to what she was talking about. The second I got her to download this, she started sending me the most disturbing videos I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't actively go out of my way to watch nasty, horrible videos. The first video she sent me was titled, "This is my room, LOL." I clicked on the video. It was only 6 seconds long, but it showed Ellie lying on her bed. She was wearing shorts and a pair of socks. The whole video was pretty pointless, she barely showed me most of the room. But all of a sudden, I realized that there were loud yelling noises coming from somewhere in the building where she was. It sounded like a lady, an older lady, screaming and yelling. Around the 5-second mark, there were banging noises on Ellie's door. She quickly pointed the lens downwards, and then the video abruptly ends. I replied back a few moments later, saying, "What happened? Who banged at your door?" And she replied, "It was Mother. Found out I ate too much today." Now, this was more than disturbing because if you put the video into context, I could see Ali's legs. They looked extremely skinny, almost malnourished. She had barely any tissue or calf muscles around her lower legs, it was just all bone. I felt sick to my stomach, yet my heart was pounding with anxiety, thinking that I was the only one able to help her out of this situation. I had the money, damn, I wanted to adopt her. But I couldn't go about it that way. I knew she lived in Arizona, but that was it. I didn't know where. I tried to get her to start having phone calls with me, but she refused, saying that her mother wouldn't allow her to. I didn't know what I could do in this situation. I didn't feel comfortable enough to outright ask her where she lived, and in reality, I didn't like the idea of getting involved with the whole family. But I was genuinely worried for her well-being. By the 3rd month, she was sending me videos of her in tears, an absolute mess, looking into the camera. She kept explaining every day how her mom would hit her and get into massive arguments with her 2 younger sisters. The point of our contact that made me panic into action was one message that she sent me around the 4th month. At this point, I'd become numb to her complaints, the videos of her crying, even the videos of her mom yelling and screaming. I wasn't doing anything. I feel guilty for saying that right now, but I'm not going to lie to you guys. It took so much for me to stop things. It took the point of someone being killed for me to step into action and save this girl. On the 4th month, she sent me a video. She was crying, and so was one of her other sisters. They were in a room, but it was virtually pitch black. She had her phone flashlight on while recording. This video was around half a minute long, and she sent it with no context or any titles, so I didn't know what to expect. Once again, she was crying along with her sister. I was getting sick of seeing these and didn't really know if I could help at all. I used to try and reassure her and just simply be there for her if she wanted to vent or talk to me about any of her issues. But she ends up pointing the camera around the room, and to my absolute horror, when she angles the camera downwards, I see that one of her sisters is lying on the floor. At first, I thought maybe she was sleeping, but I realized that her eyes were still open, and her mouth was wide open. She looked pale, even kind of blue around her lips. Immediately, I start spam calling Ellie. I spam her over text as well, pick up. Pick up. Pick up, all in capitals. I keep spamming until eventually she picks up. My cool. I can hear her crying, but she's whispering to me, telling me that she has to be quiet, saying that her mother had gone insane and killed her younger sister. I remember breaking down into tears, feeling violently sick at the message she gave me. That was it. I told her to message me her address. I don't know. I don't know where I live, it's in Arizona somewhere, she whispered while trying to contain her cries. The situation I was in was now life or death, as I thought at any second their mom could kill either Ellie or the other sister. The two sisters were locked in a dark room with their dead sister lying on the ground. Ellie explained that the mother had strangled her in anger and accidentally killed her this time. At this point, I had nothing else to do but contact the police. The 911 dispatcher that answered my call was so confused and told me that Arizona was in a completely other jurisdiction and state. She still said though, as it was a case of an emergency that I was aware of, that they would get in contact with the dispatchers in Arizona at that area and jurisdiction. At this point, I handed over all the details I had about Ellie, her age, all the chat logs, the screenshots, the videos, her phone number, her area code, and much, much more. It took the cops no more than 3 hours to locate her. They really do use some sophisticated technology. When they got there, they found out that the mother had, in fact, killed the youngest daughter. At this point, they arrested the mother on suspected murder charges. She was charged and found guilty within only 2 weeks. Ellie was adopted, she was adopted by other parents, and I still talk to her to this day. For a while, she went into foster care, which she absolutely hated, but still, even that was better than living with her mother. It turns out, after I got an update from the cops and a reward for telling them about this, they said that she had severe psychological damage, emotional, physical, and mental abuse. On top of all this, she had severe cognitive issues and had the mental age of a 12-year-old when it came to arithmetic, English, writing, and even reading. Ellie could barely read anything apart from simple words like, "Hi, LOL, how are you?" or basic texts. This explained why she really never wanted to answer any of my questions and only ever really sent me videos or occasionally just random videos with her not even saying anything. It's disgusting what some people do. Some people don't deserve to even have life or bring it into this world. The mother is vile, and I hope she never gets out. I plan to meet Ellie one day, although this did happen way back in 2013. She's now almost 9 years older. We still talk on a weekly basis and keep updated, but we're yet to meet as we live over 3 states away from each other, which would be like a whole day of driving. When I was 17, I was looking to buy my first car. I was on Craigslist every single day. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a beater car that could get me from point A to point B. My budget was $3,000 at most, so the cars I was looking at were no newer than 2004. One day, I found an ad for a 2002 two-door Honda Accord listed for $2,000, with mileage under 80,000. Right away, I knew I wanted to check it out. The person who posted the ad lived a few towns over from us, a 20-minute drive on the highway. I convinced my mom to drive me there to view the car after conversing with the guy over the phone. Originally, I texted him asking for details, but he ended up calling me. He sounded basically normal over the phone, actually rather polite. He answered some questions I had about the car and whatnot. When he asked for my name, and I told him Dan, he said, "Dan, what a great name, that's my name too." I laughed because it was the polite thing to do, but I just found it to be such an odd comment, like everything about it. It almost sounded like he forgot his name was Dan because of the pause between, "what a great name," and, "that's my name." It just sounded sketchy. Nevertheless, everything else about the call went fine. One day, I found an ad for a 2002 two-door Honda Accord listed for $2,000, with mileage under 80,000. Right away, I knew I wanted to check it out. The person who posted the ad lived a few towns over from us, a 20-minute drive on the highway. I convinced my mom to drive me there to view the car after conversing with the guy over the phone. Phone. Originally, I texted him asking for details, but he ended up calling me. He sounded basically normal over the phone, actually rather polite. He answered some questions I had about the car and whatnot. When he asked for my name, and I told him Dan, he said, "Dan, what a great name, that's my name too." I laughed because it was the polite thing to do, but I just found it to be such an odd comment, like everything about it. It almost sounded like he forgot his name was Dan because of the pause between, "what a great name," and, "that's my name." It just sounded sketchy. Nevertheless, everything else about the call went fine. So, the next day, my mom drove me to the address the guy gave me. Getting off the highway and onto the streets, right away, we agreed this was a trashy-looking neighborhood. Bars on windows, graffiti under bridges. I was hoping the guy's place wouldn't seem equally sketchy, but as we pulled up, it was. It wasn't a standard property like the rest in the area. The entrance to the property was between two houses. It wasn't a driveway, just some low-key road that led into an inlet with two more houses. Every house was cramped between other houses and buildings. But there I saw it, the Honda Accord, which was in what you'd call the driveway for this house. My mom and I stepped up to the front door and rang the bell. We didn't know if it rang or not because we couldn't hear anything. So, I knocked. One of the windows opened out of nowhere, and a man's voice said, "Come inside, the door's unlocked." I went to open the door, and my mom stopped me, whispering, "Are you sure you want to go in there?" I said, "Yeah." I let ourselves in, expecting to be greeted by Dan. The inside of this place was kind of dark, not a lot of natural light came in through the minimal windows. "Hello?" I spoke. "Yeah, over here," a voice called. It was a deeper voice than I heard on the phone. "Dan?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. I began walking through the little kitchen closer to his voice. My mom grabbed my shoulder and stopped me. She whispered in my ear, "We're leaving." The man's voice now came from beyond a door at the end of the kitchen. He called, "Come down here, we could do the transaction here." My mom and I left the house in a hurry. As we were hurrying to my car, a lady at the next building over called to us. She came hurrying down from her front porch, warning us not to go in there. Then she asked why we were there, and we explained that I came to buy a car but that he was calling us into his basement. The woman said that she's been concerned about that man living next door for months, that she thinks he's up to no good and that he constantly has random cars pull up in the driveway in the middle of the night. We asked if his name was Dan. She said she wasn't sure but that she vaguely remembered the guy introducing himself as Mike. She told us to just get far away from the house immediately, and so we did. It's disturbing to know my mom and I may have been in danger in that basement if we went down there. Like, how could we do a transaction before even viewing the car or agreeing on anything? A better question, why in the basement? The whole thing screamed trap. I don't know what else he could have wanted to do to us, more specifically me, in that basement. This actually happened to my best friend Chris. His family had just bought a new TV and was thinking of just throwing their old one away. Chris's older brother John suggested to their dad Rick that they could sell the old TV on Craigslist to make some easy cash, since the family never used Craigslist. John said he could set up the ad for him since John's girlfriend used Craigslist before. So, John put up an image of the TV with the description, used 55-inch Samsung 4K TV for $200. He also put Rick's phone number, so if anyone was interested, they could just call or text him. A week later, Rick got a call from a guy who introduced himself as Toby and said he was interested in the TV and wanted to know if he could come by the house at 10 o'clock that same night to pick it up. Rick said sure and sent Toby his address. Later that night, while Rick, Chris, and John waited outside the house for Toby to come so they could help him load the TV into his car, Rick got a call from Toby, saying he wouldn't be able to make it to the house because he was almost out of gas. So, he and Rick agreed to meet in the parking lot of a Circle K. After Rick got off the phone, he, Chris, and John loaded the TV in the back of Rick's pickup truck, and they took off to the Circle K where Toby said he was at, which was 15 miles away from the house. When they got there, they pulled up in a parking space next to the gas pumps where Toby was filling up his car, a black Nissan Altima. A few minutes later, a tall, heavy-set, bald guy with a goatee walked over to Rick's truck and said he was Toby. He told Rick that since the TV was big, it most likely wouldn't fit in his car, so he suggested they could follow him back to his house. Rick agreed. After a few minutes of driving on the main highway, they got onto a back road which looked sketchy because it was nothing but trees on either side of the road, and it was filled with potholes. Toby texted Rick and said his house was at the end of the road. When they got to the end, the place that was supposedly Toby's house didn't even look like a house at all, it looked more like a tall abandoned building. When they got out of the truck, Toby told them to untie the TV from the back so they could start unloading it. After they untied the TV, they turned around and saw 3 large men emerge from the back of the car, and they all pulled out guns, including Toby. They threatened to kill them if they didn't give them all they had on them. Rick, Chris, and John didn't hesitate, so they all gave the guys their wallets and phones, and they obviously took the TV too. After taking everything they had, the guys got back in the car and drove away. When Rick, Chris, and John got home, Chris and John told their mom everything that went down, and Rick called the cops and told them the whole story and even gave them the license plate number from the car since he memorized it. To this day, Chris's family never heard of any arrest being made. That was the one and only time the family ever used Craigslist. I stayed in a house with a friendly landlord. We were quite close, to the extent that whenever he wanted to make changes, he'd reach out to me and explain everything he planned to do. This kind of communication is quite rare between tenants and landlords. As a tenant, I lived in James's house for over 5 years, and this is the first time we've encountered any issues. I resided on the 5th floor of the apartment building, and I was the only one occupying that floor. In 2 years, I had never had a neighbor, which was fine with me. I could play my music as loud as I wanted without anyone complaining. One day, James reached out to inform me that he had placed an ad for a new tenant online. He mentioned that I shouldn't be surprised if someone moved in next door. I didn't think it would be a big deal, the place was small, and my music would still be audible even with a new tenant. However, no one came. There were no knocks on my door, just occasional mail deliveries. After a while, I decided to ask James about it. He claimed he had no idea why no one had reached out to him, so I offered to help him find suitable websites to post the ad. James seemed to be getting depressed, and I worried that he might consider selling the apartments, which would mean I'd be evicted. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed having the floor to myself, but I sensed that James would sell if he couldn't find another tenant. Since James was a good guy and a friend, I didn't mind helping him. I went to the apartment next door, took some pictures of it, and assisted James in setting up the ad. We placed ads on various websites like Gumtree, Craigslist, eBay, and others I can't recall. James answered the phone when I called him. "James," I said, "I've set everything up, and it's looking good. You can check out the ad and let me know if you want to make any changes." "Man, thanks, bro. You're the best. I'll let you know once I check it out," James replied. After ending the call, I returned to my work, spending 3 hours writing. Later, I received a text from James with a thumbs up emoji, indicating he liked the ad. We could only hope for the best. The following week, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it, and a young lady stood there, gazing at the empty apartment next door. She had blonde hair, bluish-red lips, black clothes, and almost purple eyes. She smiled, though it appeared somewhat forced. "Hello," she said softly and hesitantly. "Hi, welcome to James's. Is this apartment 614 in the building where you live?" I answered, noting that the apartment building was amusingly named after James himself. "Yeah," she replied, stepping away from the door. She seemed shy and nervous. "Sorry if this is a bad time. I know you just moved here last week," she added. "No, it's not a problem at all. Please come in." I motioned her inside, and she introduced herself as Kim. I asked her name in return, and her eyes lit up when she heard mine. "Are you Marcus?" she asked. "Well, unless there's someone else on this floor with that name, I guess I am," I chuckled. "Thank God, I met you. I thought I'd be sitting in the lobby all day. James asked me to get the keys from you. Can I move in today?" She handed me a piece of paper with my name on it, confirming her identity. "Your name is right there. Do you have a key?" I asked, and she nodded. I handed her the key and showed her the way to her apartment. We chatted, getting to know each other better as I helped her with her boxes. At first, I thought we'd just chat briefly in the hallway, but she ended up inviting me inside, and I spent hours helping her unpack. Hey, no biggie, I thought, though it interrupted something important I was doing. I didn't want to be rude and make a bad first impression on my new neighbor. Once Kim was settled in, I returned to my apartment, feeling content that I had been able to help James with the new tenant. I knew I wouldn't be lonely anymore, although I might have to turn my music down a bit. Kim initially seemed a bit awkward, which was understandable for someone in a new city meeting their neighbors for the first time. However, she quickly warmed up to me, asking questions and engaging in small talk, a rarity in the city. I made myself a sandwich and sat down in the living room. There was something peculiar about Kim. It felt as if I knew her from somewhere, but I couldn't quite place it. I shrugged off the thought and focused on my meal. Kim came to my door a few more times, and each time, I had to remind myself of her beauty. I helped her with tasks like changing light bulbs and checking the water heater. I was good at such handiwork, and it seemed to make me a useful first neighbor. The only thing missing in her apartment was furniture since it was unfurnished. We had stated this in the Craigslist ad. There was just a small chair and a table in the center of the room, which didn't meet the legal definition of furnished. "You've got a lot of shopping to do," I remarked as I carried one of her boxes into the kitchen. "Yeah, I don't even know where to start," Kim replied, staring into the living room. "The whole place feels kind of big." "Don't worry, you'll get used to it with time," I assured her before returning to my apartment. As the evening approached, I put on my headphones to listen to music, a rare occurrence for me. After a while, I found it hard to focus on anything and decided to engage in some other activity. About 20 minutes into my work on a new book, I heard a knock on my door. It sounded like someone had left their suitcase outside, and the carpet muffled the sound beneath my door. I found it odd. Who would leave their belongings unattended when going out on a date? It didn't make sense. Another strange thing was that tenants from other floors, who weren't part of James's property, rarely visited our floor. It didn't seem to serve any purpose for them, as the elevator could take them directly to the ground floor. My phone rang suddenly, and I left the bag outside to answer it. It was James, and he sounded agitated. "What's up, man? Why are you in such a hurry?" I asked. There's a problem. Kim's dead, James replied. I was dumbfounded. Kim. I spoke to her not too long ago. She's next door. What do you mean? James explained further. I got a call from the police, and I was told that I was the last person she contacted before her death. Panic and confusion surged within me. If Kim is dead, then who the hell is in her apartment? I exclaimed. What do you mean? James asked. Someone came over today, a woman. I helped her settle and get ready. She said that her name was Kim. James called the police and told them to get there as fast as they could. I ended the call and thought of the following line of action. I needed to keep her occupied until the police came. If she found out I was the one who called them, I could be next. She invited me for dinner. I could use that to keep her there. I left my apartment with the bag dropped at my door. I knocked on Kim's. Hey, you're early. Her smile sent shivers down my spine. How could she be so calm? Well, yeah, someone dropped this at my door, so I figured this could be yours, I replied. She took them from me. Thanks. Make yourself comfortable. I walked in while Kim locked the door. Then she walked back into the kitchen where she was cooking dinner. So, where are you from? I asked to keep the conversation going. We heard police sirens approaching, and her head turned towards me as she glared. It was apparent she knew that I knew she wasn't Kim. Before I could move, Kim threw the knife she held at me. It was an awful, clumsy throw I could dodge, but the blade stuck right in the side of the wall. At this point, I fell to the ground, trying to figure out what to do next. You. The voice belonged to Kim, and now she was running at me with another knife. I didn't even think twice when I jumped to the side. Instead of trying to avoid her attacks, I pushed her against the wall. She was a lot smaller than me, a lot weaker. I pinned her against it with my arm and wrapped my free hand tightly around her neck. Kim struggled under me, and I didn't think she would last much longer with the amount of blood coming from my shoulder. All the while, I couldn't keep control of her wrist. She was slicing up my forearms, and the blood was pouring out of them. I could keep her body in place, but she kept moving her arms around. Kim sent a kick to my groin, and it destroyed me, completely destroyed me to the point where I couldn't even think straight. I loosened my grip, and she pushed me off from above her. She got up and slammed the chair on my back. I groaned in pain. It was too late for her to finish the job with me if she wanted to escape. I heard a couple of knocks on the door, and our eyes darted to the door, but I rushed at her. Then I heard the police begin to ram down the door. James ran to me as they subdued the fake Kim. Next time, let me handle the new tenant, James said. That's all I remember after fainting in his arms. I lost a lot of blood that night and had to get a transplant. In this case, I remember thinking how crazy this all was. To give you guys some context of what actually happened after the police investigation, here goes. It turns out this lady was not Kim, obviously, we all knew that, but her boyfriend's ex was called Kimberly, and then I won't say her last name. She killed her ex-boyfriend's ex, if that makes sense. It was out of revenge and vengeance. He got back with his ex and left her after finding out she was a psychopath. She had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and a bunch of other crazy mental health disorders. After this, she went on a rampage. She only killed Kim, but she stole all of her documentation, all of her devices, including her laptop, her phone, and somehow knew quite a lot about technology in order to break through all her passcodes to her phone and laptop. After this, she took the disguise of Kim, the lady she had killed. The body was found in the national park, buried around 4 feet underground. The investigation was huge and cost millions of dollars, but the police unearthed the truth eventually. This tiny little lady, whose real name I won't reveal, is now serving time in the county jail. Back in 2012, when Craigslist was more popular, my house was broken into and robbed. A bunch of things were stolen, like 2 TVs, my Xbox 360, all of my video games, my hockey skates, and whatever stray cash I had lying around. I had the police come to investigate the house, but nothing that would help track the perpetrator, including fingerprints, was found. I gave them a list of everything that was stolen, but the cops in my county usually suck, and they didn't help at all. Now, I had to replace everything that was stolen. Believe it or not, the costliest thing to replace would be the video game collection. But I was starting with the replacement TVs. I went to Craigslist, and there was an ad posted earlier that day for a 40-inch Panasonic TV at a low price. Panasonic was the brand I had, so I contacted the seller and drove to his house that night. He let me into his disgusting home, and the stains on the carpets and the general messiness of the place didn't help. He brought me to this back room where the TV was. I examined it, and it was the exact TV that I had in my living room that was stolen. Then I started to look around the room, and I noticed another smaller TV tucked in the corner of the room, as well as an Xbox. The smaller TV looked exactly like my other TV that was stolen. I went to pick up the Xbox and checked the bottom of it for the specific long scratch in the case that mine had, and there it was. That was my Xbox. That was all of my stuff. I looked at the guy who had a confused look on his face, and I said, "Dude, you're the one who stole my stuff." His expression changed, he played dumb and had an angry tone now. He told me to get out of his house and lifted his shirt, exposing his gun holster. I live in Texas, so he likely had a license to carry. I left the house and called the cops. They arrived at the scene, but the man wouldn't let them in. He insisted they get a warrant and claimed that I was harassing him. I told the cops about my police report and the robbery and everything. They said they wouldn't be able to get a search warrant until the next day. I regretted not getting pictures while inside the room, but I wasn't thinking clearly in the moment. I was furious and didn't know what to do. But that night, while I was getting ready for bed and doing research about search warrants, lawyers, and different possible outcomes to this situation, I heard a window break downstairs. Immediately, I knew it was him. Following my instincts, I climbed out of my window and down to the small ledge under my window. From there, I jumped to the ground and ran to my neighbor's house. My neighbor let me in while I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. I handed the police my spare house key I had hidden on the side of the house, and they investigated the house again, guns drawn this time. Inside, they found him hidden under my bed. If that's not terrifying, I don't know what is. When I said earlier that cops usually suck, yeah, this was the one time I actually loved the cops here. And yes, it was the man who posted the Craigslist ad. He actually broke into my house to kill me that night, as he had his gun on him. And why else would he be hiding under my bed? That doesn't sit well with me even to this day. He was found guilty of breaking and entering with intent to commit murder beyond a reasonable doubt and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Even still, I moved to a new town and changed my number. I tried to strip any possible trail that could lead that man to me when he gets out, and I'm sure he's out by now for alleged good behavior. That's the part that scares me the most. All of this over less than $1,000 worth of items. It actually makes me sick. I think Craigslist is one of the most dangerous places on the internet you could go. My dad was the first one to say to me when I said vinyl is dead, now CDs have taken over for good. No, he said, Michael, you're wrong. Vinyl will still be around. It's a pure sound. It will take time for people to realize, you wait and see. I said, Dad, you're forgetting I work in a record shop. We're now selling 70% more CDs than records. We have even started to reduce the quantity and mix of vinyl that we now hold in the shop. This is because the demand is changing in favor of the CD. Our other branches are reporting the same demand change in favor of CDs. Sadly, my dad passed away in 2017, just as a vinyl revival was gathering pace. Now it is one of the most popular mediums. I bet my dad is looking down and saying, "I told you so." I no longer work in a record shop. I now work in an insurance broker's office, which pays better. But I have to admit it isn't very interesting. However, I never lost my love of music. Since leaving the record store, I've become a bit of a vinyl expert in buying and selling records as a side hustle on the weekends. Sometimes I'm just looking to buy specific records as long as they're in good condition. Other times, I will hire a pitch at a record fair and sell some of my collection records. I found it very interesting talking to fellow collectors, and I found that I always learned something new each time, as some of my fellow collectors had been in the business a lot longer than me, so their depth of knowledge was great. It was a great interest to me, and I could learn a lot. These individuals actually helped me in starting a new record collection I hadn't even thought of before, so they were responsible for me widening my horizons in collecting new things. I still live at home, as I am now looking after my mom, who is getting on. Unfortunately, her health is not so good anymore. She struggles to get around, but her mind is as sharp as ever. She used to say to me, "Don't you dare put me in one of those old people's homes, because if you do and I die, I'll come back and haunt you forever." She would say that to me almost every night, and I knew she was being dead serious. She hated those places, it had to be her biggest fear. But I had no intention of ever putting her in one, and I swore that to her. I used to say, "I'm not going to put you in an old people's home, Mom, but if you are bloody awkward, I might put you under the back decking." She would laugh at that and say, "Well, at least that is better than the old folks' home." Mom had given me permission to use the spare room as my record hobby room, so I had hundreds of records stored in special record racks. Everything was coded and had its place. I had a manual record book as a computer database which listed the keep collections, sale collections, and also wanted collections. I also had a spreadsheet showing each year's spending on purchases as well as earnings from sales. This was broken down into quarterly and yearly. This meant that I could look back over the years and see in what direction my hobby was going and my overall profit and loss over the years. This would enable me to put aside more or less money to buy more records for the future months. I'd spent most of my Friday evenings on Craigslist looking for any suitable record adverts. I'd bought from Craigslist in the past, so I knew it was worth spending some time to try and find the good stuff. This one advert caught my eye. It was offering some early Beatles records and about 10 Rolling Stones albums. Also, there was a mix of 1950s records that came with them. I decided to give the seller a call and have a quick chat about what he was offering. His name was Jacob, and he said the reason for selling was that he just had too many records now and that he had started moving house, so he had to make some space for any new collections that he may buy in the future. As soon as anybody said they had too many records, my eyes would light up because it meant that you may be able to persuade them to part with more than they were advertising, not always but sometimes. After a chat, he said that I could come around and see the records and listen to some for clarity tests. He had over 3 record players all set up in his house, so it was not a problem. He said that I could come around at 4 p.m. on the Saturday. He then gave me his address, which was in El Paso, Texas. I thanked him and told him my name and that I would see him then and hung up. I set off on Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. Everything went well on the drive down without any delays, so including the stop on the way, I'd arrived at his house at around 3:45. I checked for the house number that he had given me and found it. This place looked like it belonged to somebody in the 50s. The porch had an old light, it looked original wooden, but the whole thing looked like it needed some real serious renovation. I could see as I stood on the porch there was a book on the table. The book was titled Recording History, The British Record Industry 1931. I was about to knock when I saw that a note was pinned to the door. It read, "Sorry, door jammed. Please come across to the back entrance." I stepped off the porch and proceeded to walk down to the side of the property. There was a big open yard at the back of the house, and on it was an old red station wagon that looked just like it had come off the film set. To the side of it was some sort of agricultural-looking machinery. The machinery was rusty, and it looked like it had not been used in years by the appearance of all the vegetation growing out of it. Even the old doghouse was just standing by the outbuilding, and even that looked old and unused. I turned to the back of the house, and there was one of those insect mesh doors. I had to open it first to get through. They always seemed to make a creaking noise every time I'd ever opened one. I'm sure it's some weird alert system just to let the owner know that someone is coming to the house. I pulled it open and then knocked on the inner door. The door opened to reveal a thin man wearing a black t-shirt and blue jeans. He had black worn-out looking shoes that were torn and crippled. He had dark hair with gray showing through and a heavily lined face. I estimated he was in his late 50s. "Oh, you saw the sign then," he said. "I presumed you're Michael coming about the records I spoke to you the other night." "That's correct," I said. He started looking around the door entrance for something and then said, "I don't suppose you've seen a book lying around outside on your way down called Recording History? I seem to have put it down somewhere and can't damn well find it now." Yes, there was one on the front porch with that exact title," I told him. "Oh, great, I've been looking for that. Please come in." The man was extremely eccentric. He reminded me of Doc from Back to the Future, well, personality-wise anyway, not looks. He showed me into the kitchen. "Please excuse me," he said. "I'm just going to get the book from the front." And he went out the back door. As I stood in the kitchen, I could see that there were lots of records on the walls and frames spread around the room. There were two 50s floor-standing microphones in the corner of the room near the fridge, and just beneath them were two large boxes that were full of records. "Sorry about that, Michael," he said, making his way back into the kitchen. He was clutching at the book. "Please follow me into the living room." He showed me into a large room that had views over the backyard. It soon became apparent that the wall space was taken up with framed limited edition records and also wall racks with literally hundreds of records. The room smelled musty, like it suffered from damp, but I noticed a few air fresheners dotted about to try and mask the smell. "Wow," I said. "That's a hell of a lot of vinyl you've got here. Any idea how many you've got in total?" "No," he said. 2,000 maybe. What do you think, Mason?" "Who's Mason?" I asked. As he turned over to a high-backed armchair looking out at the window, I got a shock. There was another guy in the living room facing the window with his back to us. I didn't even notice him when I walked in. This guy must have been called Mason. I assumed that's what he called him, but Mason wasn't responding. Jacob then said, "Sorry about that, Michael. My brother can be a bit of an ass when he wants." He then went on to say that there were Beatles and Rolling Stones albums. He pulled over a large brown box with a lid and pushed it along the floor to me. I took hold of the lid and started pulling out the records and removing them from the sleeves to check them for scratches. After about 15 minutes, I checked all the records, and sure enough, they were all in good condition with little to no scratches. Jacob then said, "Please feel free to use this record player on the stand here," he indicated, pointing to it just over by the boxes. I played about 2 sample tracks from each record, and all of them sounded clear, crisp, and extremely good. After this, he came back over to me and said, "Are you still interested?" "Yes, I sure am," I said. We then both did a bit of a bargaining moment, and he finally accepted my offer. I paid him in cash, and he said if I could take them out to my car, he'll try and find the boxes of records he thinks I'll be interested in. I took the box out and put it in the trunk. I returned to the living space. By this time, Jacob had found the other box he had been looking for. He removed the lid and said, "This box has Jerry Lee Lewis, Ray Charles, and Johnny Otis, the 1950s collection I was telling you about. Here, take a look." I went through and checked the 20 records, and once again, they were all in great condition. I was starting to have second thoughts if I wanted to buy these too. I looked back up at him and asked, "How much for these?" Jacob said, "Well, on this lot, we have to ask Mason what he wants for them, as the 50s are his collection. Isn't that right, brother?" he said, turning towards the chair. But again, there was no reply. Jacob then said, "I'm so sorry about this, Michael. My brother can be so rude and lazy about things. It has caused all our arguments in the past. We hardly speak anymore, to be honest." He then picked up the box and said, "Michael, please follow me." Jacob dropped the box of records on the floor with a loud bang right by the high-back chair. He said, "Sorry about that. I hope I didn't wake you. Now, how much would you like for the box of 1950s artists?" We both walked around to the front of the chair, and then the true realization of the horror hit me. I was looking at a decomposed body covered in a heavily stained suit that was breaking up with maggot-covered, rotting flesh. The round spectacles were balanced on a bare-bone nose, and the eye sockets were black where only the eyes would have been. "Mason, has the cat got your tongue?" said Jacob. "Or are you going to answer me? We need a price for these records," as he pointed down towards the box on the floor. I couldn't speak, a voice was screaming inside my head to get the hell out of there. "Do you see what I have to put up with every single day now, Michael?" I turned and ran for the door. Jacob called after me, "So you don't want the 50s records then?" I shot through the back door and ran for my car. I was in and out of the driveway in under a minute, hitting the mailbox as I reversed. I'd phoned the cops, and when they investigated, it turned out his brother had died of natural causes in the chair. His brother had developed a no-acceptance syndrome at the death, so he still believed he was alive. In fact, he had been dead for some time due to the decomposition of the body. Once, I responded to an ad posted on Craigslist for a free mini fridge, listed under the "Free Stuff" section. I was in the process of setting up what people would call a "man cave" in my basement, and I needed a mini fridge to store beers and other drinks under the bar. I checked the address on maps, and the house was apparently waterfront, situated atop a tall cliff overlooking a huge lake. The person who was texting me said his name was John but mentioned that he wouldn't be in the house, only his elderly mother would be there. He instructed me to let myself in and go to the far right bedroom by the foyer, emphasizing that his mom had difficulty hearing and moved very slowly. For a moment, I pondered the possibility that, instead of me answering the ad, the people behind it might have malicious intentions, taking advantage of the situation. It seemed almost too easy to rob this old woman's house. While coordinating a meeting time with John, around sunset, I couldn't help but appreciate the beautiful view as I pulled up to the long dirt path leading to the property. The large house perched at the top of the hill with the sun setting over the cliff made for a picturesque scene. Before entering the house, I took a couple of minutes to admire the view of the lake below. I then messaged John that I had arrived. He repeated his instructions to let myself in and go to the room on the far right, as his mom would be waiting there. He reminded me again that she was very old, and I would need to handle all the lifting myself. I replied that it was fine. Upon entering the house through the front door, which was left slightly ajar, I was immediately greeted by the scent of cotton, reminiscent of my grandma's house. I followed John's directions and made my way to the door on the far right, leading to a narrow hallway. The house seemed quite large at first glance. As I ventured down the hallway, the comforting smell of cotton suddenly gave way to a horrendous odor. It smelled like death, akin to the stench of a rotting animal. I entered the doorway at the end of the hall, and the source of the unbearable smell became apparent. A decomposing corpse lay on the bed. It was the body of an older woman, and it appeared as though she had been dead for a week or two. I felt nauseous. Suddenly, I heard loud, maniacal laughter coming from upstairs, accompanied by stomping noises, as if someone were deliberately trying to frighten me. It seemed that someone was in a room directly above me, stomping their feet to intimidate me, and it worked. I fled the house, rushed to my car, glanced at the house one more time, and spotted a man at one of the upstairs windows. Then I realized there was another person standing at one of the downstairs windows. Both were wearing face masks, like the ones used for protection against the coronavirus. My phone started blowing up with text messages, all in capital letters. The first text read, "Hahaha," followed by more messages like, "We see you, look at the windows," along with a slew of emojis. The final text I received said, "Come back inside, you forgot your fridge." I immediately left the property and, while on my way home, called the police to report the dead body in the house. After the police investigated the house and apparently removed the deceased body, which displayed no signs of stab wounds or bullet holes, they came to my house for questioning. I showed them the entire conversation and provided the phone number, though I warned them it was probably a fake number, a prediction that proved true. However, Officer Boris assured me that they could still trace the number, even if it was through some kind of fake number app. A week later, curious about the case's status, I called the police station. Unfortunately, the person who answered the phone either had no information or didn't care enough to look it up, as she came across as rather rude. To this day, I never came across any news or reports about an arrest being made in connection with this incident. Consequently, I remain uncertain if the people in that house were apprehended or if they were even responsible for the woman's death.